First, we're going to talk about the COVID inquiry, and actually for the next half hour, really pleased because one of my favourite guests, former Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Ben Habib, will be with me. Welcome, Ben.
Good evening, Kevin. A pleasure to be on with you, as always.
Always a pleasure, Ben. Now, I want to talk about the COVID inquiry, which, by the way, trundles on at obscene, grotesque expense. £300,000. That nonsensical inquiry ploughs through of our money every single day. £300,000 a day. Anyway, the one question that inquiry will not inquire into is the one we want answered. Were the lockdowns necessary? I think people like you and I already know they were not. They were the most catastrophic policy of modern times all over the world. Countries destroyed their economies, destroyed their social structure, abandoned their children's welfare. Absolute disaster. Countries like Sweden and the state of Florida didn't go into lockdown. They ended up with better death rates than us. So it's absolutely clear to me lockdowns were wrong. The reason I'm bringing this up is a Labour employment minister, you will have heard of her, of course she's a household name in her own house, Alison McGovern. She's insisting that she brings this into play, despite the untold harm that they inflicted on school kids and young people, the so-called lost pandemic generation. The lockdowns were necessary. What these politicians and their groupthink. I mean, this is an insult to the people. It's an insult to the inquiry is an insult to the people. When are we going to have a generation of politicians who are honest enough to say to us, those lockdowns, they look like a pretty bad mistake to us?
So the reason I think you and I know the lockdowns were bad is because in every respect, they materially adversely affected the majority of the people in this country. And the issue that I think they find really hard to grapple with is the one of democracy and the majority interest versus what they see as their liberal, morally correct, accepted, received wisdom that every single life, every single individual needs to be protected, no matter what the cost, even if the vast majority of people are adversely affected as a result of it. And I think lockdowns was an example of extreme liberalism gone completely wrong. That's a generous interpretation. Mm-hmm. There are other interpretations I could give you which involve fraud, deceit, corruption of the mind, and so on. But the ideological, I think, case that they have rested their arguments on is that all life must be protected at all cost, even if the majority is materially adversely affected. And this precautionary principle has infected government at every single level. You know, if you walk up the steps outside London Bridge tube station, coming to your studio.
As I do quite regularly, yes.
As you do. As you walk up those steps, you'll see it written on the steps. You know, don't be on your phone, hold the handrail. And then somewhere at the top of the steps, and I always find this really amazingly funny, is at the top of the steps, it'll say, don't walk up, take the lift. And I think, well, I've already walked up, so I'm not going to go down and take the lift. But it's this precautionary principle, the protection of the individual at the cost of the majority, that has infected politics at every single level. And it was displayed in spades with lockdowns. And what they won't ask is, were the majority, as I say, materially adversely affected by it? Did it break our economy? Yes. Did it cause inflation to rise? Yes, because it broke supply chains, it broke the labour market. Are 6 million people on universal credit now as a result of lockdowns because they got mental health issues, they've lost their habit to work, and actually the labour market's been totally destroyed? Yes. Is the NHS in a worse state as a result of lockdowns or in a better state? It's in a worse state. Waiting times have doubled, the number of people waiting has doubled. Is our national debt in a better position? No, it went up by 500 billion. Every single metric that you would choose to point at to determine whether lockdowns were a good idea or a bad idea will indicate that the majority of this country were worse off as a result of lockdowns, including, by the way, the key metric, which is what was the average death of the individual during lockdown. Actually, the average death was over the age of the average expected life. So that life expectancy was not at all reduced by COVID in any way whatsoever, which is evidence, if you needed any evidence, that we should never have locked down. It was a tragic, tragic mistake. And we took our lead, and we must never forget this, that the West took its lead from the totalitarian regime of China in how to respond to a pandemic. Why is the democratic West, or at least we used to be democratic, taking its lead from a totalitarian regime? That you have to ask yourself, repeatedly.
Absolutely. Also, we rolled out vaccines that weren't properly tested, and vaccines that we were told, as Boris, remember, game changer, take this vaccine, you won't get COVID. Oh, wait a minute. You will get COVID. It won't stop you getting COVID. Well, at least it'll stop you passing it on to your granny or to other people in your family or your friends. Oh, wait a minute. It won't stop. It won't stop you passing it on to anyone else. We think it might stop you dying or going to hospital. I mean, those two last factors are difficult to quantify, but that's what they tell us. So all in all, we rushed into, as you say, this massive, what I would call a huge overreaction. Now, I'm not trying to in any way undermine the severity of this pandemic, and of course it caused great tragedy, but you should remember that the death rate of COVID-19 was fairly low. It was fairly low, and the lockdowns, I always thought, Ben, that at the time, demonstrably, we could see they didn't work. Right, we're locking down, 6 weweeks later or a month later, amazing, death rate down to... Let's unlock. Oh, wait a minute, everybody's dying again. Well, we're locked down again, so we're locked down for a month. Oh, wait a minute, we've unlocked.
I mean,
you know what I mean?
So many policies were ridiculous.
Every time we unlocked, the COVID came back. So my question, I suppose, is given that, given the stories of Sweden, Florida, various other countries, Russia, various other countries that didn't lock down, why is this massively expensive £300,000 a day inquiry refusing to ask the question, were lockdowns necessary? The only questions that massive behemoth of an expensive mess are asking are these. Did we lock down early enough? Did we lock down hard enough? No, the very policy of locking down must be questioned. It's a scandal. It's a scandal that they won't address this question.
Those conducting the inquiry are hijacked by exactly the same ideology, that the individual, no matter the cost, needs to be protected, even if it's demonstrably against the interests of the majority. And it's infected our approach to immigration, our approach to the Constitution, our approach to democracy, our approach to free speech. We shut down free speech in the pursuit of the so-called rights of the individual against the majority. Effectively, what lockdowns was a massive assault on democracy, a massive assault on our civil rights. And we see that repeatedly. We've seen that with Alison Pearson, with the non-crime hate incidents, and the other 13,000 people per annum who are arrested or questioned, not arrested, I should say, questioned, investigated, including 9-year-olds at school over non-crime hate incidents. And it's also tied, by the way, the same principle is tied to this, to that question in Parliament today, which I heard you asking about before I came on. You know, the Labour MP getting up and saying, "Well, look,
we're going to move on to that. I want to address that as a separate feature in just a minute. I want to get your feelings."
It's the same ideology.
Yes,
it's the same ideology.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very interesting point you've made. I mean, I think it recalibrated the nation's mindset in two ways. One was about working. Now, Rishi Sunak was the then Chancellor who extended the furlough scheme ludicrously over long. He kept extending it, because I'll tell you why, Ben, like all politicians, he went, this is really popular. People love me for this. Now, I'm not saying that the furlough scheme wasn't a reasonable idea at first, but the way that it went on for nearly 2 years,
It's absurd.
There were people getting 90% of their wages for 2 years, and when they were suddenly told, actually, you've now got to go back and work for your money, actually millions of people said, you know, I don't really like working. I don't think I'm going to do that again. So we had a sort of lazy virus infected the nation.
Absolutely.
And continues to do so. And the other thing is what you just mentioned. We became immune to a kind of state, a police state, a Stasi-like police state.
Yeah.
We sort of stood by and said, oh, it's OK for the cops to arrest people because they're standing too near their friends while having a cup of coffee. We thought that was OK. So we've become sort of immune to police overreach because of the COVID crisis. It damaged us in so many ways. All of these points are not being addressed by the COVID inquiry.
Absolutely right. And Christopher Hitchens said when he was alive, very sensible man, that actually people, authoritarian regimes don't take away people's liberty. People offer up their liberty to be taken away to governments. And that's what we did as a people. We just gave it up. We didn't, you know, Boris Johnson used to say, used to really get me down. He used to say, COVID is like World War II. You know, it's the same kind of battle. But actually, in World War II, people gave up their lives to save civil liberties. In COVID, we gave up our civil liberties to save our wretched lives. It's the inverse of World War II. And in many ways, that exemplifies the massive journey the Western civilization and the United Kingdom's been on since World War II. We've lost the political will. We've lost the will at any kind of coordinated community national level to fight for that which is right for the nation state and its people. What we tend to do now, what we always do now, is focus on the individual. Focus on the individual. Everyone must be protected. Everyone must have a right to identify as a woman. They must have a right to identify as a dog if they want to. They must have the right to their own religious beliefs, their own sexual preferences, and the majority's interest should be set aside. Our culture is unimportant. Our great values on which this terrific nation state is built should be set aside in the pursuit of the individual. The individual, the individual, the individual. We're going to wrap that individual in an absolute protected blanket, and the majority will have to suffer for that individual. And we've got to stop it. Democracy turns on the interests of the majority, and the majority were materially adversely affected by lockdowns. And it had nothing to do with Ukraine war that we had inflation. That may have come as a later may have made it worse, but we had inflation because we'd broken supply chains, we'd broken the labor market, we'd broken our ability to get access to fossil fuels. It was an absolute travesty that we locked down. And that's what that COVID inquiry should be concluding. Those are the questions that should be asked. Not to mention, of course, the billions of pounds that the Conservative government wasted in track and trace, the stupid apps that never worked.
Well, when nobody could get more than about 10 yards from their house without being beeped and sent home again for 3 weeks. It was ridiculous.
And all those
my favourite was there was the tier systems, weren't they? You know, 3-tier systems in cities. But my favourite was the pub table, when you could only drink in pub gardens. But you could sit down. The rule of six. You can stand. The rule of six, where there could be 6 people at a table, but only 4 at the next table, and you could never be. You know, it was just absurd. And we all went, oh yeah, well, fair enough, fair enough. Well, I say never again, and I say that. The COVID inquiry is the epicentre of all that's wrong with modern politics and modern politicians, that they close their ears to the genuine concerns of the people. The people want to know. The people feel that we were kind of conned with lockdowns. The people feel that lockdowns were a terrible mistake, and our body politic will not contemplate that issue. And that's a disgrace. It's a disgrace.